Welcome to episode number 382. I believe it's 382 of the Church Solutions Podcast. My name is Phil Thompson.
And I'm Steve Lacy.
I'm pretty sure it's 382. We're getting up there, Steve. How are you today?
I'm doing good.
All right, good deal. So we have a guest today, which we will introduce in just a moment or so. I want to take care of some business, though. We have an exciting webinar coming up May 16th. If you're listening to this or watching this podcast before May 16th, we'd encourage you to sign up. It is about software encoders. And Steve, tell us a little bit about this webinar and what people can expect.
Yes, we're going to go into the pros and cons. Why choose a software encoder like vMix? So we have one of the key guys, Heath Parker from vMix, that's going to join us. And we're going to kind of go through the ins and outs of if you're looking for an encoder and should I get a hardware encoder, software encoder, and the software encoders that are out there? What's the landscape like? So we will be talking with Heath Parker, and he's going to give us, he's been doing a lot longer than we have, and much more broadly. So he's the expert in the field. So we're going to learn all about software encoders and learn about vMix too.
Yeah, and this is obviously pertaining to streaming video. That's what we do. And so if you're interested in this, you can sign up. It's going to be May 16th. It's my mother's birthday, May 16th. And it's actually, the webinar is actually going to start a little later than we usually start. We do this monthly now. We do different webinars monthly. And this one will be happening 6 p.m. Eastern time. Am I right about that? Yeah.
That is correct.
6 p.m. Eastern time. So 3 on the West Coast.
And 8 a.m. Australia time.
Yeah, the 8 a.m. in that would be May 17th, Australia. So
those of you, right,
yeah, those of you listening from Australia today.
Heath is joining us from Australia. That's why I mentioned it. So
that's right, he is, and he'll be a day ahead of 17 hours ahead of us. So if you want to like invest in some stocks and stuff, you might want to talk to him because he's ahead of time, right? He's in the future. Isn't that how that works?
Yes.
Is that okay? All right. So how do you sign up for this webinar, Steve? It's free, but how do you sign up for it?
You go to webinar.streamingchurch.tv.
Webinar.streamingchurch.tv. All right. Yeah, sign up today. Well, actually, we're going to be giving something away. Do we know what we're giving away yet?
I think we're giving an upgrade to vMix away.
All right. Okay. So anyhow, good information as we try to bring you. All right. So enough about us. Let me put my glasses on here. I want to introduce our guest. Her name is Angela Yee, and she has created practical articles and books that make life easier for leaders. That sounds good to me. They're books on Christian event management, on personal organizing, and now there's a newly launched book she's got out called The Volunteer Bridge, a practical approach for moving people from sitting to serving. And you can also see her articles. They're found on her website, angelayee.com. And Angela, thanks for being our guest today. How are you?
Good. I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're glad to have you here. And as you know, and we all know, those of us, we've all been involved in ministry for a long time. Volunteers are hugely important to the life of a church. And they're just very valuable. And we can't share enough love for our volunteers that work. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about this book and about some questions. Steve, if you've got something lined up, go ahead and tee it off.
Well, one thing is certain churches seem to have a knack where everyone's involved. Volunteers are up and out of their seats, and they're making it happen. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got just really frustrated church leaders that are having to do everything and can't get people motivated. So why is that?
Well, there's lots of reasons for that. And there's no magic bullet for volunteer mobilization and engagement. But there are certain principles that churches can engage in when it comes to mobilizing volunteers. And the way that I like to picture it, it's almost kind of like a train track, so that you have two rails building simultaneously to create that thriving volunteer culture. One side is the culture piece, which has to do with the teaching and the beliefs, the values, the expression. The other side is the systems piece, which has to do with tools and processes and teams, just structures that you put in place. And so some churches do one or the other a little bit better. I would say that the ones that are really thriving is because they've really tapped into that side of building that volunteer culture. And they're able to just kind of inspire people, remind them of their greater purpose and their calling, and people respond as a result.
That's great. There's one of the things that I think you must be uniquely gifted at is creating kind of word pictures of things that are going on. I visited your website, and you talked about, drew an illustration of someone sitting in their seat, which everyone does every Sunday. You're going to have a church full of people that are sitting in their seat. And then on the other side is somebody that's actively standing up and serving. And then there's this river separating the two. So that's kind of ties into the theme of your book, Building a Bridge. So what are some of the, how does one go about start to build that bridge?
Yeah, so what you're describing is kind of this picture that I have in mind, that there are people on the shores of sitting, is how I put it. And they're just not involved. They're just engaged, and they're bystanders, and they're watching. But the goal is to get them over to the land of serving, where they're actively engaged and they're living out God's call in their life and really involved in ministry. And so the idea is to build a bridge over it, over that middle section, which I call the swamp of inertia. Because the inertia is just really hard to get people to move. And there's all sorts of barriers and all sorts of, issues and maybe just some resistance to serving. And so what are ways that we can build that bridge over to help people cross into the land of serving? So it's all about lowering the inertia level. It's all about kind of looking at where people are at and seeing what are ways that we can help them take the next step. And so there's some people who are just ready to serve. Well, if that's the case, great. Get them connected easily, immediately. And then there's some that are just not ready. And that takes a lot more time, where it might involve prayer, inspiration, teaching, and those sorts of things.
I assume there's a lot of steps between the sitting on the one bank and then making your way all the way over to the other. So I assume there's things that church leaders can do to get people to start onto the bridge, maybe some low friction thing. And then pretty soon they, after several steps, they're to the other side. Is that the path, or is it just trying to catapult people from one side to the other?
Oh, it's all about whatever next step that people can take, and so there actually is a continuum of where people are at. Got the people who are ready to serve. I call them the convinced. Like, it's basically just add water, and then they're ready to go, right? And so what those people really need is information. So is it easy to find? Are they able to immediately connect with what they need to have so that they know exactly what to do? And then the other side of the spectrum is the people who are totally complacent. They don't even know what serving is. It's not even on their radar. Or if it is, they really don't, they're just not interested. And so the system needed for that side is the inspiration system, which is teaching the word of God, it's testimonies, it's building relationships. So there's a continuum, and my book outlines 4 different stages that people are at and the kind of system that's needed to help them take that next step.
So
go ahead. I want to jump in here, but go ahead, Steve, finish your question.
Is the book, is it targeted towards the senior pastor, or is it who's it targeted towards, lay leadership within the church? Is who's the recipient who's the best target for your approach?
It's at different levels. So yes, it'd be great for senior pastors, because part of the recommendation that the book makes is to centralize some of the efforts in volunteer mobilization, because that cuts down the competition between ministries, and it helps kind of develop a quality standard that's consistent for all people, depending on despite which ministry they're signing up to serve. But it could also be for the ministry leader. Like, how to mobilize people in my own ministry? How do I develop a volunteer mobilization team in my own ministry that can really help connect people into serving in our ministry?
Let me jump in and ask you a question here, Angela. I used to work with a guy who was just really good at recruiting people. I mean, if he was a college basketball coach, he'd probably have all these great players because he was just great at recruiting. But some people aren't as good at recruiting. And Steve, you know who I'm talking about is Randy White.
Yeah,
Randy
that's what I
was
was thinking.
really good at recruiting for the children's ministry, we're Steve and I go back a long ways. But some people, it's hard for them if they're leaders. They're not. Some of them are. A lot of leaders are introverts, right? So, any tips for these people that aren't maybe out there? You know what I mean? If I'm an introverted leader, which I am, how do I get out of my shell and how do I recruit? Or maybe I'm short circuiting what you're saying here.
No, I'm with you because I am one of those people. I find it really hard to talk to people I don't know, and it feels a little odd to like ask them to do things. I think there's a couple of factors that go behind that. First is acknowledging that we're not all good at everything. And it's okay if you have a hard time recruiting volunteers, like that just may not be your bent. But if it's not, are there people you can partner with? Are there people that you see, they're just like natural inclination is to invite someone to something? I call them like super recruiters, right? Like there's always people, I go at church, I'm like, oh, who invited you? And they're like, so-and-so invited me. Next person, same answer. Next person, same answer. There's just some people that are very skilled and gifted at that. But then the other part to remember about volunteer recruitment is a huge part is relational. And so it might just be like having coffee with somebody, someone who you might meet that is new, getting to know them and their interests, because the power of a personal ask far exceeds any kind of system that you can put in place.
Yeah.
So developing relationships is really key.
And let's talk. You and Steve were talking about systems, and I'm a systems guy. Steve is too, I think, and we're into systems, right? But talk a little bit about the culture part, because at the very beginning of this podcast, we talk about it really needs to be part of the church's culture. How does somebody listening to this podcast that's in leadership, how do you develop that culture that will attract volunteers and get people serving?
A huge part of storytelling. So, scripture, obviously, of course, is key and it's critical. Not most leaders don't have the opportunity to preach sermons about serving or anything like that, but there's always an opportunity to share a story. And so whether it's someone on stage sharing a story, a short video clip, a testimony of any kind, like people really appreciate hearing that, and it's very inspiring. And God uses the stories in a very powerful way. Jesus used them all the time. Very effective.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry to hijack your question.
I was, as you're talking through this, I'm flashing back to a instructional video that I saw not too long ago. It was an example of, I don't know if it was leadership or getting people involved, but it was. Let me know if you've seen this, but it was at a concert from a long time ago, and a bunch of people are on the grass and they're listening to the concert, and then there's this one guy that stands up and he's just dancing and going crazy, and everyone's kind of looking around like, what's going on, and then they kind of broke it into phases. There was this guy, and then another guy stood up and started dancing, and then other people started looking around, and then there's a few more, and then a few more, and then a few more, and then just through amount of time, everybody was up there dancing in this big grass field. So it was kind of I think about that when I don't know if it's a leadership example or getting people involved example, because it takes a few really brave in this illustration to, the first guy that stood up, most people thought this guy's crazy, but the next guy thought, oh, he's having fun. Let's the Randy Whites of the world jumped in. But anyway, is that an approach for, is that something you would espouse, or is that built into your book or your approach? What do you feel about that?
Steve, that's such a great example. I have seen that video, and it's really fascinating because it only took one person. And just the sheer enthusiasm made people want to get up and dance. So I think it is really powerful to model that kind of attitude. Like leaders that I feel are really effective recruiting people, it's because they're passionate about what they do, about serving. People, it's just contagious. And so people are like, hey, that looks like fun. I want to join that. I want to be part of that. And so for me, even though it's hard for me to talk to strangers, it's actually not that hard for me to invite people into ministry, because to me, serving is fun. It's like, yeah, there's hard parts and things like that. But when you're doing something that is making a difference, God is using you, and you see that, and you see the way that the strengths that he's given to you are being utilized for his glory, like there's just nothing that compares. And there's such a joy that comes out of that. And so I just think, wow, people aren't serving, they're totally missing out. It's fun, it's joyful, it's purposeful.
Yeah, that's a key attitude, I think, because I can envision, one of the pastors like, we don't have any more people in the children's ministry. We're really dying back there. We need to help your kids. And, that's one way to promote it. Or, wow, this was super fun. These people got to play with these kids, and, or whatever it may be. I assume the approach, and a need-based approach, I think, is not the one that's going to be the winner here.
No, it's not. But I've heard some leaders say you should never use a needs-based approach, but I actually think that works for some people.
Oh,
Because
okay.
some people, like my husband, for example, he typically doesn't get involved until he hears there's a need for it. And then he's like, oh, maybe I should help out with that. There are some people that are attracted to meeting needs. But if it's this desperation, like, oh my goodness, things are terrible, we don't have enough leaders for our youth.
Yeah. Where do I sign up to?
Yeah.
Where do I sign up to join that sinking ship?
Exactly. Right. Who's going to sign up for that?
Where's the balance there? I mean, so Angela, you just said some people do respond to the need, not the extreme, but the need there. I mean, do you just kind of sprinkle that in every once in a while when you're making announcements, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if there's a legitimate need, you can express it, but I think it really is how you express it, right? It's not the sense of desperation. It's say, oh my gosh, things are terrible and everything's just going downhill. We really, really need people, but it's more kind of like, hey, we have an opportunity to make a difference here, and there is a need. This is a need that we can help fulfill. Yeah. That if God is tugging at your heart or opening up something, loosening something in you to consider, like, please do.
What do you think is a big obstacle for people that may be sitting for quite a while, but don't really want to get involved? I mean, what would you say are some of the top obstacles that keep people from being involved as a volunteer in their church?
My book does talk about a couple of streams of inertia, because there's some primary reasons why people don't serve. I would say, from my own personal observation, busyness is a big one. People are just so overloaded with their schedules, especially if you're a parent with kids still living at home. All the activities, you got to shuttle kids here and there, all the school things. People are really overloaded. And so the busyness factor is a big one. I face that in my own life because I travel so much for my work. And so I'm not even in my town a lot of the time, and so there are work reasons, there's family reasons, things like that.
How do you overcome that? Do you just give them slack and say, you know what, you're busy, your life is busy, and we understand?
I think some of it is showing grace, but it's also asking, well, what are ways that person can engage in a way that more aligns with what is going on in their life right now? So, for example, some ministries require people to always be there in person, and if that's the case, well, that may not work for someone who's traveling, but is there something remote or virtual that person could be doing while on the road? Or if they're only at church a few times or once a month, like for that time, is there a way for them to attend the service and then maybe do something afterwards or before? So it's creating some flexibility and options for people in how they serve. And acknowledging that, yes, it is kind of a crazy season going on right now.
Yeah, I think it's common misconception that people think they see the public serving roles, and they assume that those are the roles that I could participate in. When you're saying there's a bunch of stuff that goes on that no one really sees that might be a really good fit. I assume, is that part of the book, is kind of outlining other opportunities that may not be I'm not going to be the greeter. That's not my spiritual gifting. May not be the greeter, but all I see every Sunday is the greeter. So now when you want me to volunteer, I don't want to be the greeter, but there may be opportunities that aren't seen. Are there ways that church can make those opportunities more visible?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The behind the scenes roles are so critical. Like, our churches cannot function without them. And so, but part of the thing is, like, public roles people see, right? Oh, worship team. Yes, we see people on the stage all the time. But, like, do they know there's opportunity to maybe help out with the setup of all the tech production that has to happen beforehand? Do they know that there's help needed for scheduling volunteers? Unless that's explained in some way or publicized in some way, people may not necessarily know. So I think sometimes part of the communication is saying there's lots of behind the scenes stuff too, for those of you who enjoy that type of thing.
Yeah. We've got a few minutes here. So when I was in leadership at my church, one of the things that we did, and let me get your thoughts on this, was we actually got this from Rick Warren, I think, and that was a class on discovering your gifts and your talents. And you go through the class, I think we called it 201 or something like that. And maybe it's 301. Yeah. You're familiar with it, right?
Yes.
And Rick's retired now, I think, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. Have to have coffee with him one of these days. But anyhow, and then we would meet with the people after the class one-on-one. And we found, at least in my opinion, I found that to be very helpful, because we were able to put people in positions that they were more suited for, that they were more gifted for. Do you talk about that at all in your book? I mean, what's your thoughts on that whole approach?
Oh, I think that is an excellent approach. And the overall philosophy I have is it's a both and approach. Like, there's lots of different things that you can do. And so integrating different channels and opportunities for people to engage. For example, something like a spiritual gifts class, in a sense, it attracts the people who are almost convinced to serve. The fact that they would attend the class means that there's some interest there, right? And so, yes, having a guide afterward or an individual afterward that can sit down with them and help them go through the results and talk about what the ministries that are available to serve at is really, really helpful, because it lowers the barrier. But then also there need to be approaches for other people who may never even get to the class, because serving is not really had priority for them. So yeah, it's looking at that whole continuum and saying, how can we make sure that we hit all the people on those different stages?
So as you look at churches that have a very vibrant volunteer culture and systems and stuff, what are there, I hate to boil everything down, but if there was like two or three nuggets that you could pick out, what they may be doing right, what would you say about that? What would those two or three things be that they're doing better than the other churches?
Are you talking about only culture, or like the whole thing?
The whole thing.
The whole thing, yeah. I think there's a key leader identified is a huge one. There's someone where it's like it's on their shoulders, they're thinking about it, they're making sure that something is being done to mobilize volunteers. Because if it's everybody's responsibility, then in a way it becomes nobody's responsibility, right? Or you end up with competition. And so is there a key person? And I think even better is two key people that can partner together in helping to mobilize the church and ensuring that there's communication going on, inspiration, all of that, and systems being developed. I think the other key is that there is volunteer, I don't know what the word is, volunteer care and appreciation and celebration that's going on. That's a huge piece of what I see these churches that are thriving, like they're cheering people on. They have events, they send them notes for their birthday. People are like, I love serving here. And then what will happen? They'll invite their friends. And so that really becomes kind of like this exponential impact because all that preaching is going on. And then the other part is just some kind of really easy sign up mechanism system so that if someone says they're interested, they're immediately followed up, they're connected with the ministry, and that person doesn't fall through the cracks. The ministry leader actually follows up.
All right. Well, those are great little pillars of the system. So yeah, that's great.
Removing obstacles. I have found in some churches, sometimes they'll put these obstacles up that keep people from volunteering, and it can be that struggling. All right. So as we wrap up here, what would you say to a pastor listening to this podcast right now that is just down, that is just struggling, that, there's so much to do in the church, our volunteers, there's only a couple of them. They're inconsistent, they're sporadic, they're flaky. What would you say to a pastor listening right now that's really going through it in this department, in this area?
Yeah, and that really is a story that I'm hearing quite a bit, especially post-pandemic. Churches are really struggling to find volunteers, and the commitment level doesn't seem to be there as much. So I think the thing to encourage or think about is, what's the bright spot? What's the one thing that you see is going really well? Is there one person that there's potential in them and you could pour into, and perhaps it could grow from there? I think what's discouraging is looking at all the things that we can't control. But is there something or someone God has put in your life that there's something that you could maybe spend a little time on, pray for more, some opportunity that God might grow as a result? For me, it's just take the next step, just the one step. What is that God is putting in your heart?
Absolutely. All right. So the book is called The Volunteer Bridge, a practical approach for moving people from sitting to serving. Angela Yee has been our guest. So Angela, how can people get a hold of you? Should they just go to your website? What's the best way for people to, find out more about you, talk to you? Just
yes,
Angela.
my website.
Yeah, good. What is it? Tell us what it is.
It's AngelaYee.com. That's YEE with 2 E's.
Okay.
And there's a little video there where I draw the little diagram with the bridge, so you kind of see how it works. There's some information and a link to the book there. And then there's also just other leadership articles, that you're free to read if you're interested.
Yeah. So I was reading in your bio that I don't know if you're still in this position, Chief Ministry Officer of a church denomination. What is that?
Chief Ministry. So we do a lot of mission work. So I serve as the Chief Ministry Officer of the Evangelical Covenant Church denomination, and we serve local churches. And so the Chief Ministry Officer under me are the executive ministers who are over our different ministry areas. So like church planting, clergy credentialing, and so forth. That's what Chief Ministry Officer does.
So what's the future hold for you? You're going to be moving out of that position?
I am.
What's next for you?
In October, yeah. And so I was a long time in the local church field, and I feel called to be able to resource and support pastors and leaders, church leaders. Yeah. And so I will return to the church consulting field.
All right, good deal. All right, great. Well, this is awesome. All right. So check her out. Check out the book, The Volunteer Bridge, a practical approach for moving people from sitting to serving. So it sounds like a great book. I'm sorry we haven't read it. We have a lot going on here. No problem. So we're not your typical podcast. We do a lot of things here. So many times we don't read the books. Steve listens to books. That's how he gets away with things. But I can't listen and do things at the same time. I don't know why that is, but must be talented, Steve. Must be nice to be multitasking. All right. So as we wrap up here, and again, I want to thank you, Angela, for being our guest. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We definitely need to have you on again. I want to encourage people to, if you haven't subscribed to the Church Solutions podcast, that's us. Subscribe, give us a rating. Check us out. We got lots of resources for you. You can always go to streamingchurch.tv and check out our resources as well as other things. And don't forget, our webinars are every month now. And this one coming up May 16th is going to be on software live encoders. So sign up for that. Just go to our website. Just go to streamingchurch.tv /webinar, right? Steve, did I get that right?
you register before the webinar, so it's webinar.streamingchurch.tv.
Yeah, that's a little trick. Webinar.streamingchurch.tv. I screwed it up. I'm going away now. I'm leaving us.
You've done great.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. So we're done here. Again, thank you, Angela. Thank you so much. And on behalf of Steve Lacy, I'm Phil Thompson, and thank you for being a part of our podcast today. Please take care of yourselves and each other. We'll catch you again on another episode of the Church Solutions Podcast.